Around the world, pressure is building on multiple fronts. This week's developments span military strategy, shifting alliances, active war zones, nuclear safety risks, and humanitarian disasters. Taken together, they offer a snapshot of a world where power balances are changing, crises are overlapping, and decisions made far from the public eye are shaping what comes next. Here are the most important events you need to understand. Let's dive straight into it. Trump unveiled strategy to prevent China conflict over Taiwan. The United States has made one thing unmistakably clear. A war over Taiwan is now treated as one of the most dangerous flashpoints on Earth. In a newly released national security strategy, President Donald Trump outlines a hard-edged approach aimed at stopping China from changing the balance of power in East Asia by force. The timing is not accidental. China has sharply increased its military activity around Taiwan and nearby waters, recently deploying large numbers of naval vessels near Japan and across the South China Sea. It was one of the largest show of maritime force in the region in years, sending a signal not only to Taipei but to Washington and its allies. At the core of the strategy is deterrence. The document argues that preventing a conflict is only possible if the US and its partners maintain clear military superiority. The message is blunt. Beijing must believe that any attempt to seize Taiwan would fail. Taiwan sits at the heart of global trade routes and plays an outsized role in the world's technology supply. The island produces a dominant share of advanced semiconductors, making its security a critical issue not just for Asia but for the global economy. Losing Taiwan, the strategy suggests, would have consequences far beyond regional politics. China, however, sees Taiwan very differently. Beijing considers the island part of its territory and has never ruled out the use of force to bring it under its control. Those claims extend beyond Taiwan to much of the South China Sea, an area also claimed by several neighboring countries. The United States does not officially recognize Taiwan as a separate state, but it remains its most important military and political supporter. US law requires Washington to help Taiwan defend itself, a position that has fueled tensions with Beijing for decades. What stands out in Trump's new strategy is the sharper language. Taiwan is referenced repeatedly, far more than in previous documents, and described as central to stability in the Indo-Pacific. The strategy emphasizes building a powerful chain of defenses stretching from Japan down through Southeast Asia, but also makes clear that America does not plan to carry this burden alone. Allies are explicitly urged to spend more, build more, and do more. At the same time, uncertainty remains. President Trump has avoided stating directly whether the US would intervene militarily if China attacked Taiwan. His focus on deal-making and his effort to improve ties with Chinese President Xi Jinping have raised concerns among allies about how far Washington would go in a real crisis. Those fears surfaced recently when Japan suggested it might respond militarily to an attack on Taiwan that threatened its security. Remarks that reportedly prompted private US efforts to calm tensions rather than escalate them. For now, the strategy sets the tone. Confrontation is not the goal, but strength is the requirement. Whether that balance holds may define the future of power in Asia. Trump's strategy document revives Monroe Doctrine, slams Europe. The United States is signaling a major shift in how it sees its role in the world. In a sweeping new national security strategy, President Donald Trump lays out a vision that breaks sharply from the post-World War II and places American power, influence, and interest firmly at the center of global decision-making. At the heart of the document is a revival of the Monroe Doctrine, a 19th century policy that treated the Western Hemisphere as America's exclusive zone of influence. The strategy argues that Washington must reassert dominance across the Americas, warning that this is not a temporary posture but a long-term priority tied directly to US security. The document frames Trump's foreign policy as practical and results-driven, rejecting traditional labels like hawkish or dovish. Its guiding principle is simple. What works for America comes first. That logic extends to how the US views its alliances, including its relationship with Europe. In unusually stark language, the strategy suggests that Europe is heading towards decline unless it changes course. It hints that Washington may reassess long-standing commitments, a message likely to unsettle European leaders who built decades of security policy around close US cooperation. Critics say the tone resembles modern imperial ambition. Since returning to office, Trump has made remarks about reclaiming strategic assets like the Panama Canal and even floated ideas involving Greenland and Canada. Meanwhile, the US has significantly expanded its military footprint in the Caribbean, deploying thousands of troops, warships, fighter jets, and an aircraft carrier. Officials say the buildup is meant to counter drug trafficking and instability, but it also sends a clear message to rivals and to Latin America that the era of light US involvement is over. Analysts note that the strategy openly acknowledges concern over China's expanding economic influence across the region and positions US power as a counterweight. Beyond the Americas, the documentary enforces a tougher stance in the Indo-Pacific, emphasizing military strength to deter conflict with China over Taiwan and the South China Sea. Yet, despite the clarity of the vision, uncertainty remains. Trump's history of unconventional decisions makes it difficult to predict how sharply these ideas will be enforced in practice. What is clear is that the US is preparing to reshape its global posture, and the consequences will be felt well beyond Washington. US sets 2027 deadline for Europe-led NATO defense. The United States is sending Europe a blunt message. Take the lead on your own defense and do it fast. According to officials familiar with recent closed-door talks in Washington, the Pentagon wants European countries to assume responsibility for most of NATO's conventional military capabilities by 2027. If implemented, the shift would mark one of the most dramatic changes in the alliance's history. Since its founding after the World War II, NATO has relied heavily on American power troops, weapons, intelligence, air defense, and surveillance. Washington is now signaling that this balance must change. US officials told European delegations that progress is so far not enough, despite major increases in defense spending since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Privately, they warned that failure to meet the 2027 target could prompt the US to step back from some NATO coordination roles altogether. What makes that demand controversial is how difficult it would be to achieve. European militaries face major production bottlenecks in missiles, ammunition, air defenses, and drones. Even when money is available, factories cannot scale up overnight. Some of the most advanced US-made systems would take years to deliver if ordered today. Beyond hardware, Washington currently provides capabilities Europe cannot easily replace, including advanced intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. These assets have been critical to Ukraine's war effort and remain largely unmatched by European forces. There is also uncertainty inside Washington itself. Officials say it is unclear whether the 2027 deadline represents official administration policy or the position of senior Pentagon planners. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill have quietly expressed concern about how sharply such a shift could weaken deterrence in the short term. European leaders publicly acknowledge the need to shoulder more responsibility. The European Union has set its own goal of becoming military self-sufficient by 2030, but analysts warn that even that timeline is highly ambitious. What's clear is that the transatlantic relationship is entering a new phase. NATO is no longer just about collective defense. It is now testing how much independence Europe can truly achieve and how far the United States is willing to step back. German parliament backs controversial military service law amid Russian threat. Germany is taking a historic step that many believed would never return. In response to growing security fears across Europe, the German parliament has approved a new military service law designed to rapidly expand the country's armed forces as tensions with Russia continue to rise. After months of heated political debate, lawmakers backed a dual-track system that prioritizes voluntary enlistment but leaves the door open to compulsory service if recruitment falls short. Officials hope higher pay and incentives will attract young Germans, but the law quietly prepares for a return to conscription if needed. Under the new framework, the Defense Ministry will report recruitment numbers to Parliament every 6 months. If targets are missed, lawmakers can activate needs-based conscription through a separate vote. In each case, random selection could be used if more people qualify than required. The scale of ambition is significant. Germany aims to increase active troops from about 183,000 today to as many as 260,000 soldiers by 2035, alongside building a reserve force of at least 2,000. For a country that suspended conscription in 2011, the shift reflects how dramatically Europe's security mindset has changed. For the first time in over a decade, all men born after January 1, 2008 will undergo medical evaluations as capacity allows. Both men and women turning 18 will be asked to state their willingness to serve, although only men will be legally required to respond. Germany's decision mirrors a broader European trend. Countries like France, Italy, and Belgium are expanding voluntary military service, while Nordic and Baltic states have strengthened mandatory conscription in response to what they see as long-term Russian threat. What was once politically unthinkable is now framed as unavoidable. Germany is signaling that deterrence, not hesitation, now defines Europe's defense posture. Russian drones, missiles hit railway hub near Ukraine's capital. Russia has launched one of its most wide-ranging aerial assaults in weeks, striking critical infrastructure across Ukraine and hitting a major railway hub just outside the capital. The overnight attack targeted the town of Fastiv, south of Kyiv, damaging rail depots and train carriages that play a key role in civilian transport and logistics. Ukrainian officials said that there were no casualties at the railway site, but the disruption was immediate. Several suburban train services near Kyiv and in parts of northeastern Ukraine were cancelled as emergency crews responded to fires and destructions around the station area. The strike was part of a much broader operation. According to Ukraine's military, Russia fired more than 650 drones and over 15 missiles in a single night. Ukrainian air defenses intercepted the majority, but the scale of the attack was enough to cause widespread damage to energy and transport systems. Power plant and heating facilities were hit in multiple regions, including Chernobyl, Lviv, Zaporizhia, and Dnipropetrovsk. In southern Ukraine, tens of thousands of residents were left without running water or heat, forcing emergency repairs under difficult conditions. Port infrastructure in Odessa was also damaged, pushing operators to rely on backup generators. Russia's defense ministry described the strikes as a retaliatory operation, claiming it used high-precision weapons, including hypersonic missiles, to hit what it called military-related targets. Ukrainian officials strongly reject that claim, accusing Moscow of deliberately targeting civilian infrastructure and ignoring any ongoing diplomatic efforts. The impact stretched beyond Ukraine's borders. In eastern Poland, air raid sirens briefly sounded near the Ukrainian frontier, prompting the Polish military to scramble jets as a precaution. No airspace violations were reported, but the incident underscored how close the conflict is to NATO territory. As winter deepens, analysts warn that attacks on energy and transport networks are aimed at wearing down civilian resilience, turning infrastructure itself into a battlefield. UN agency says Chernobyl's nuclear plant's protective shield is damaged. A warning from the United Nations has once again placed Chernobyl at the center of global concern. The protective shield covering the destroyed reactor at the infamous nuclear site in northern Ukraine has suffered damage severe enough that it can no longer perform its primary safety function, according to the UN's nuclear watchdog. Inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed that a drone strike earlier this year compromised the steel confinement structure designed to contain radioactive material left behind from the 1986 disaster. Although the structure remains standing, critical safety functions, including its ability to fully seal contamination, have been degraded. The drone impact, reported to have occurred months ago, caused fire damage and weakened the outer protective layers surrounding Reactor 4, the site of the world's worst nuclear accident. Ukrainian officials have blamed Russia for the strike, while Moscow has denied responsibility. IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi said inspections showed no permanent damage to main support pillars or monitoring systems. Radiation levels remain stable and no leakage has been detected so far. However, the agency stressed that temporary repairs are not enough. According to inspectors, long-term restoration work is now essential to prevent further deterioration that could eventually pose wider safety risks. The damaged structure was completed only in 2019, after years of international cooperation and billions in funding to prevent radioactive exposure across Europe. The situation serves as a reminder of the dangers of warfare around nuclear facilities. Chernobyl was briefly occupied by Russian forces during the early phase of the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, raising alarms at the time over the vulnerability of nuclear sites in active war zones. While there is no immediate radiation threat, experts warn that continued military activity near nuclear infrastructure turns containment into a gamble, one with consequences far beyond Ukraine's borders. Indonesians climb over logs as flood deaths rise over 900. Scenes of devastation continue to unfold on Indonesia's Sumatra island as survivors struggle through wrecked landscapes to reach aid. In the flood-hit region of Aceh Tamiang, residents have been forced to walk for nearly an hour, climbing over slick tree trunks and overturned vehicles, just to obtain food, water, and basic supplies. The disaster, triggered by powerful cyclone-driven storms, has claimed more than 900 lives across 3 provinces, with hundreds still missing. The same weather system has also caused widespread deaths in southern Thailand and Malaysia, turning the crisis into a regional tragedy. In Aceh Tamiang, roads remain cut off, leaving entire communities isolated. Volunteers have stepped in, stepping up aid distribution centers where survivors receive clean clothing and drinking water delivery by tanker trucks. For many, reaching these centers is an exhausting and dangerous journey. Among the displaced is a 14-year-old student from an Islamic boarding school who describes spending a full week trapped inside, taking turns with classmates to search for food and boil flood water to survive. His message was simple: authorities need to witness the devastation firsthand. Local officials have urged Indonesia's central government to declare a national emergency to unlock more funding and speed up relief efforts. While national leaders say conditions are slowly improving, pressure is growing as survivors demand faster action. Environmental groups argue the damage was made worse by deforestation linked to mining and logging operations near the affected areas. The government has temporarily halted several companies' activities and launched environmental audits after aerial surveys revealed large-scale land clearing in flood zones. As rescue efforts continue, the floods have sparked renewed debate about environmental management, climate resilience, and the human cost of unchecked development.